Urgent! A bloody massacre inside Russia. The people have risen up against Putin. A split within Russia? A civil war is coming. The Kremlin has declared war on migrants. This has never happened before. All of Russia has ignited like a match. Fiery karma has descended upon the Russians. The boomerang of retribution for Ukraine has returned with double force. Russia is paralyzed by a strike in the AFU. Urgent news from Pokrovsk. Collapse of Russia's summoned flame. It happened. The AFU carried out a total sweep. A death zone for the enemy. Russians are fleeing in mass and surrendering. The AFU has created a hell for Russians from which there is no escape. An explosion at the negotiations. A sensational closed meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump has surfaced. Ukraine has pushed through the unthinkable. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Russia is coming apart at the seams. Hatred has gotten out of control. Ethnic Russians have declared war on migrants and minority peoples. A massacre inside Russia. Civil war is on the doorstep. The Kremlin is pitting peoples against each other. Soloviev has declared a hunt. Watch for all the details.
Russians against migrants and national minorities.
Who is imposing barbaric traditions on the Russian people?
According to the FSB Border Service, in the first half of 2025, almost 5.5 million people from Central Asian countries entered the country. That's only 2% less than during the same period of 2024.
The situation with migrants in Russia is currently complicated because, on the one hand, the language of hatred that constantly comes from TV screens leads to the fact that negative attitudes toward migrants in Russia are growing stronger every day. You can also add to this various incidents, including criminal cases, that have happened quite recently. A native of Tajikistan, who however has Russian citizenship, stabbed an 18-year-old guy to death in the Moscow region. Of course, this also raises the tension.
According to Rosstat, only 1 in 4 plans to work in Russia. The rest mostly move to join relatives. In Russia, they've even created a profile of the typical migrant family. It's often a large family with a low official income and the mother does not work. Such a family can receive between 700,000 and 2.5 million rubles from the Russian budget annually.
On the other hand, the Russian economy cannot exist without migrant labor. And in this, everything's in this kind of ambiguous situation.
Fuel is added to the fire by the so-called Russian community, an organization that supposedly defends the rights of Russians. On their Telegram channel, not only are recent crimes committed by migrants published, but in general, propaganda is carried out to discredit non-Russians in Russia.
Migrants work in many places, mostly, although, as we know, special legislative acts are being passed. For example, in some cities, the work of migrants as taxi drivers is already completely banned, while in others, it is not yet fully prohibited. But in any case, the situation is quite tense.
And it doesn't stop with migrants. National minorities also get in the way of Russians.
If we take Bashkortostan or Tatarstan, for example, the ethnic composition there, the population of the republic is larger than respectively the number of ethnic Bashkirs or ethnic Tatars. Therefore, despite the fact that the region is nominally called Bashkortostan or Tatarstan, there is still a significant ethnic Russian population there.
In the current format in which Russia exists today, it is no longer a federation, but is gradually becoming a unitary state, where national schools are being closed and the rights of national minorities and ethnic groups are being infringed upon.
Putin. Fiery karma has caught up with the Russian Federation. An oil giant is in flames. An oil depot and a thermal power plant are under attack. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Friendly drones in the armed forces are turning the rear into hell, and Russians are facing instant retribution for attacks on Ukraine. All the consequences of the fiery boomerang are coming up in your report. Due to the work of drones, the Russian city of Penza, so to speak, is leaving the chat. The oil depot is out of commission. Later, local authorities will confirm the drone attack, and they will report a fire at the oil depot.
First, the oil depot in Penza, which, as far as I know, is not just an ordinary oil depot, it actually serves, let's say, a certain strategic function, in the sense that it's an oil depot used both by the Russian army and accordingly. Also supports the logistics of movement directly within the region itself, among other things. a region which, again, like all of Russia, is currently working for the front. So disrupting this logistics chain will already lead to corresponding problems.
In addition, it is preliminarily known that the local thermal power plant was also attacked by drones.
There's a nuance because, according to my information, something also hit the Penza thermal power plant. In other words, we're talking about the strikes that the defense forces continue to carry out against the energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation. Why do I consider these facilities to be military targets? First of all, this needs to be discussed, because this is what's called a switch. If we turn it off, shutting down such a switch affects the production and capacity of the military-industrial complex.
It was also reported that in the Voronezh region, as a result of Russian air defense operations, a residential building caught fire, which, when it comes to Russian air defense, has unfortunately become routine. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the operation of air defense in the Voronezh region, but did not mention the consequences of these actions.
As for the protection of such facilities, we know that Russian air defense systems, first and very importantly, pose a threat to the local population. Because we very often see how Russian air defense systems launch missiles and end up hitting their own homes.
Meanwhile, SBU drones struck the Taman-Neftegas oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar region. And Taman-Neftegas is an important facility. It's worth noting, not an ordinary one.
We're talking about supplying the Black Sea Fleet. No matter how much its power has been reduced by air defense forces, unfortunately, it still has missile carriers, particularly in Novorossiysk. And these ships accordingly need fuel. As a result, they may not be getting enough of that fuel. In other words, this means a reduction in the number of combat sorties, for example. This is about supplying Russian troops in the south, the southern group of forces. This directly affects the front line. That's why such strikes, plus the disruption of the production cycle, are so significant. After all, it's not just about destroying a storage tank, which by itself is quite a sight when it's burning, but it's also about disabling unique equipment that Russia today cannot replace. They can't fix or resolve these problems in a timely manner. That is, this equipment requires time to install new replacements. I have serious doubts that the Russian Federation today is ready to make up for these losses after such strikes very quickly. And
such strikes have already become routine for Russia, which is clearly unable to cope with attacks by Ukrainian drones, although, of course, there have been attempts.
Russia has started covering oil refineries with metal protective structures and nets.
But the so-called spiderweb nets did not become a panacea. And then
Russia began recruiting volunteers to guard oil refineries against drone attacks.
In short, while the Ukrainian armed forces are increasing the number of strikes and honing their precision and effectiveness, Russia is frantically trying to come up with a solution to counter Ukrainian drones, but so far, as we can see, without success. Because it's hard to call spiderweb nets, groups of volunteers, and air defense systems that target residential buildings an effective means of fighting drones. The Pokrovsk trap is worked. Ukraine's forces cleared the southern flank. Occupiers are retreating and surrendering. Kyiv's troops strike from above as drones decimate enemy positions. The southern flank of Pokrovsk has been completely cleared. All the latest news from the front lines. Watch now.
this is how Ukrainian drones operate in the village of Hrustino, Pokrovsk district. The enemy tries to break through the defenses in small groups, but strike UAVs won't let them. Pokrovsk and Migrant remain the hottest spots on the front line. In the past 24 hours, 92 out of 222 clashes occurred in these directions. In order to occupy even the small towns and villages around Pokrovsk and Migrant as quickly as possible, the Russian invaders have redeployed additional forces to this section of the front. Additional forces. Special emphasis is placed on drone operator teams.
The Russian occupiers are betting on increasing the number of UAV teams. But these increases turn into decreases thanks to our hunters against these teams, who work quietly and unnoticed. Lately, they've been caught in some rather interesting places.
A Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Muchnoya reports that in the Pokrovsk direction, the AFU cleared the southern flank of Pokrovsk and drove the occupying forces from their positions. In the course of the operation,
They took prisoners during the operation. Several Russians have been eliminated, reducing the enemy's combat capability. For now, this section remains firmly under our control. The enemy should not be present there and is currently unable to recover quickly, the soldier writes. As for Suketsky, the situation is as expected, no surprises. The settlement remains under our control, just as before. To the south, the gray zone has receded somewhat, but for now, this is more of a tactical fluctuation than a change in the area's significance. At the same time, this section will not be easy. The enemy is trying to apply pressure, looking for weak spots, so the tension there will remain.
Russian forces have not achieved success in Pokrovsk, so they're trying to encircle it. Right now, the hottest spot there is Grishinau. The occupiers are trying to get in there at any cost.
In addition to wanting to seize the northern part of the city, as we can see from the expansion of the red zone, the enemy is also acting. They're bypassing this northern part and have recently focused their efforts on Grishinau. They know and understand why this settlement is important. Our pilots are operating there and logistics routes pass through that area. And in general, all the operations being carried out in the direction of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk are concentrated in the area of Grishinau.
The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, also visited this area. He noted that the Ukrainian armed forces are managing to hold back the enemy, who is trying to infiltrate Mirnograd and Pokrovsk in small groups.
In Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, Ukraine's defense forces continue to hold back the enemy, who is trying to infiltrate the northern districts of both cities in small groups. As a result of active assault operations, another enemy attempt to capture these settlements was thwarted. The operational reserve deployed by the occupiers has suffered significant losses. At the same time, the situation remains difficult.
And here's footage of the clearing operation in Kupiansk, Kharkiv region. The Kardia strike group continues to push the remaining Russian invaders out of the city center. In the Kupiansk direction, the defenders have taken control of commanding heights, which seriously complicates any enemy attempts to advance. Maintaining control over the approaches to the settlements allows Ukrainian forces to retain command of the situation, despite the ongoing high tension. In Kupiansk itself, Ukrainian armed forces soldiers continue clearing the city of occupiers. There, the majority of enemy soldiers are concentrated in one neighborhood.
Most of the enemy is concentrated in the city center, in a single block of apartment buildings. Therefore, the current objective is to complete the clearing of this block, and preferably to do so without any casualties among Ukrainian soldiers. You can see on the map all the attempts by the Russians to regain their positions and somehow reach the city, to somehow re-establish communication with it. By land, there is none. And there is no success here, nor will there be, and the pressure to the east of the city does not lead to this. And this means that these people are not receiving reinforcements.
The occupying forces, despite their losses, are trying to seize Kupiansk. However, this task is becoming more difficult for them due to significant losses in manpower and equipment.
The Kremlin has urgently started playing a new tune. Russian propaganda has been given fresh instructions. Greenland is at the center of the attack. Putin is teaching Trump how to seize other people's lands. Why is the Kremlin pushing this topic, and what are they preparing the audience for? All the details coming up next.
In global politics, talk of redrawing borders has resurfaced. The reason was statements by Donald Trump about Greenland, the world's largest island, which formally belongs to Denmark, but has long been within the strategic interest of the United States.
I'm only asking for a chunk of ice, cold and poorly located, which could play a vital role in ensuring peace and security around the world. This is a very modest request compared to what we've given them for many, many decades.
Previously, Trump has repeatedly stated that the United States would like to strengthen its control over Greenland. According to him, it's a matter of national security, military presence, and economic interests in the Arctic. Trump emphasized that he is not talking about a forceful takeover, but made it clear that the island's status could be a subject of negotiations.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use overwhelming force and coercion, in which case we would be, frankly, unbeatable. But I'm not going to do that. The only thing the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
Well, it wasn't Europe, but naturally Russia that paid especially close attention to Trump's statements.
Simply put, as President Trump said, this territory is important for the security of the United States.
As journalists have learned, and it's obvious too, according to statements from Russian propagandists, Putin's administration prepared a special manual for state and Kremlin-loyal media. It explains in detail exactly how to cover the words of the American politician, and the main idea is perfectly clear.
Put the people of Crimea in the place of the people of Greenland, and a lot will probably become clear to you. Crimea is no less important for the security of the Russian Federation than Greenland is for the United States.
The key idea of the manual is simple. Strong countries can do this. Russian media recommend presenting the situation with Greenland as proof that the rules of the world have changed, that international law no longer works as it used to, and that leading powers act solely in their own interests, without regard for norms, treaties, or the sovereignty of others.
The United States bought Alaska from us. And if my memory serves me right, the area of Alaska is about 1,717,000 square kilometers, well, a little more. And the government of the United States officially purchased the territory of Alaska from us back in 1867 for a total of $7.2 million US. If you compare it to the gold prices at that time, that figure would probably be closer to $1 billion. But I think the United States could handle even that amount.
The manual specifically emphasizes that Trump's statement should be interpreted as an indirect acknowledgement of the correctness of Russia's policy in recent years. The idea is that if the US allows itself to talk about the redistribution of territories, then Russia's actions, including in Crimea and other Ukrainian territories, were not an exception, but part of a new global norm.
It was only in the middle of the last century that an agreement was signed stating that it was already part of Denmark. Not as a colony, but as sort of like, it is officially recognized as an autonomous associated territory, but fundamentally and geographically speaking, Greenland is not considered to be a natural or inherent part of Denmark.
By this logic, Russia is trying to instill in the minds of its citizens that the state no longer appears to be a rule breaker. On the contrary, Russia turns out to be one of the pioneers of a new reality, where the law of force is more important than the force of law.
The fact that the residents there are now used to it and feel comfortable, that's another question. But the problem of former colonial possessions is becoming more and more serious.
The manual also recommends focusing attention on Europe's reaction. It is suggested to portray Europe as weak, confused, and unable to protect even its own territories. Thus, a statement by an American politician becomes a convenient tool for legitimizing domestic policy. Not for international dialogue, but for domestic justification of past and possible future actions. Only one thing is obvious. A world in which powerful countries can act this way is a world without guarantees. And the only question is who will become the next target of these new norms.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. A new twist in the negotiations. Zelenskyy stunned the room with a single speech, a powerful address that left the world in awe. The closed-door meeting with Trump went as well as possible. The results are already shocking. While Zelenskyy sets the agenda, Putin is losing.
Putin is losing outright and losing ground. Davos has long ceased to be just an economic forum. It has turned into a platform for tough political discussions about war, peace, and the future of Europe.
Putin has failed to achieve every one of his goals. First, he wanted to seize Ukraine and make it part of Russia. He failed. He will not capture Ukraine, and Ukraine will become a member of the European Union.
On the fourth day of the conference, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Putin, he failed his strategic goal to seize Ukraine. Instead, Ukraine will join the EU. Following a massive Russian strike, President Zelenskyy arrived in Switzerland. After meeting Donald Trump, Zelenskyy delivered a resonant, tough speech.
Of the full-scale war. In Europe, we are advised not to mention tomahawks, not to remind Americans about tomahawks so as not to spoil the mood. And we are told not to ask about Taurus missiles. When it comes to Turkey, diplomats say, don't hit Greece. When it's about Greece, they say, be careful with Turkey. And in Europe, there are endless internal disputes and things left unsaid which prevent Europe from uniting and speaking openly enough. Instead of this, in order to truly become a global power, Europe remains a beautiful but fragmented kaleidoscope of small. To find a solution, Instead, in order to truly become a global power, Europe remains a beautiful but fragmented kaleidoscope of small and medium-sized powers. Instead of becoming a leader in defending freedom around the world, especially as America's attention shifts elsewhere, Europe looks confused. It tries to convince the American
president change, but he will not change. Volodymyr Zelensky's speech was undiplomatic, but rather a warning. The president stated that Europe is living in a Groundhog Day mode, repeating the same day over and over, year after year, repeating the same words about security, but never moving on to real action. Over the past year, he emphasized, the key formula has not changed. Europe is still not ready to defend itself on its own.
Europe must know how. Year after year, we repeat security promises without action. My Davos speech last year warned that Europe must defend itself, yet nothing has changed. Why are we still saying the same words? Zelensky
harshly criticized Europe's indecisiveness, from its sanctions policy to security issues.
Zelensky harshly criticized Europe's indecisiveness, from its sanctions policy to security issues. Russia is fighting to make sure people mean nothing, to ensure that when dictators want to destroy someone,
they can do it, but they should be stripped of power. According to him, while Europe hesitates, Russia continues the war, financing it with oil that calmly sails along European shores, on tankers belonging to the Shadow Fleet. In fact, the president of Ukraine put Europe in an uncomfortable position. Why is the US able to stop Russian tankers and confiscate oil, but Europe is not? And why are the frozen Russian assets still not being used for the question? Why is the US able to stop Russian tankers and confiscate oil, but Europe is not? And why are the frozen Russian assets still not being used to support the defense
against aggression, but instead become a bargaining chip and a subject of legal manipulations by the Kremlin? It's good that there are many sanctions. Russian oil is getting cheaper, but the flow has not stopped. Russian companies that finance Putin's war machine are still operating, and this will not change. It will not change without. We are grateful for all the pressure on the aggressor, but let's be honest. Europe needs to do more so that its sanctions block the enemy as effectively as American sanctions do.
A separate, extremely sensitive part of the speech was the topic of accountability. Zelensky reminded everyone that Putin is still not in court, despite the largest war in Europe since World War II.
Kill enough people and you stay in power. Who in Europe wants this message to become reality? And yet, Europe hasn't even tried to come up with its own response. Maduro is in court in New York. Sorry, but Putin is not in court. There is still no real progress when it comes to creating a special tribunal for Russian aggression against Ukraine, against the Ukrainian people. We have an agreement, that's true. There have been many meetings. But so far, Europe hasn't even reached the stage
That is correct.
Now we are actively working with our partners regarding security guarantees to establish a functional tribunal structure, previously lacking time or will. The main strategic message concerns security. We are working with partners on security guarantees. This extends beyond the post-war ceasefire and joint patrols. A good signal. But support from President Trump is essential. No security guarantees work without the United States. Regarding the ceasefire, who can help? Europe discusses the future, but must act today to shape it. Europe, according to
Zelensky, cannot forever rely on NATO and the United States. In his opinion, the continent needs united European armed forces. Real military power, not just faith in the automatic intervention of allies.
Europe needs united armed forces. Forces that can truly defend Europe. Real military power, not just faith in the automatic intervention of allies. Europe needs united armed forces to truly defend Europe. Today, the continent relies on NATO in a crisis. Response, yet no one has seen the alliance act. Today, NATO relies on faith that the United States will take action.
Zelensky emphasized that the Ukrainian army has unique combat experience at sea, in the air, and on land, and is ready to share it for the security of all of Europe.
Ukraine offers strength and unique combat experience to secure Europe. Zelenskyy noted their army's land, sea, and air expertise is ready to share. If Russian ships threaten Greenland, Ukraine's weapons and skills can stop them.
Attention in Davos was drawn to Zelenskyy's remarks about Donald Trump. Zelenskyy won't remain. They can sink near Greenland. We have the tools to fight at sea. In Davos, Zelenskyy noted security requires U.S. support. According to Zelenskyy, the documents developed to end the war are already close to completion, and Ukraine is ready to sign the agreement.
Zelenskyy says peace documents are nearly complete, and Ukraine is ready to sign. This last mile is difficult. In any presidential dialogue, I must defend my country's interests. Today's talk was positive.
Enough. Crucially, we aren't discussing peace at any cost. Kyiv is setting clear boundaries. No freezing of the war, no agreement that would give Russia time to regroup. Pressure on Moscow must increase, and support for Ukraine must grow. In turn, European leaders have essentially confirmed this approach. There were statements about the need to increase defense spending, develop their own military-industrial complex, and strengthen Europe's role as a global player, especially against the backdrop of the shifting focus in the US. In essence, Davos 2026 became a moment of truth. Zelenskyy was not asking, but demanding, not persuading, but warning. Ukraine has shown its readiness for peace, but only for a peace that will not become a postponed war. And now the main question is whether Europe will hear this signal. Because, as Zelenskyy made clear, the next Groundhog Day might not be a speech in Davos, but a new war, this time on European soil.
Zelenskyy warns Ukraine wants lasting peace. The question:
Europe hears Zelenskyy's warning. War may soon reach European soil. Russia's oil needle is broken. Their energy sector is collapsing live. The Kremlin's leverage is vanishing, as figures show a total collapse. Putin's oil prosperity is sinking. Production has hit a 16-year low. Unofficial figures confirm this decline results from U.S. sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil.
Undermined exports to India and China. Back in November, the average price of Russian oil was $44 per barrel. This is a very painful and unpleasant figure for Russia, for the simple reason that in economics, there is such a concept as cost price. That is, what you spent to extract that barrel of oil, and accordingly, you make a profit only above that cost. If the figure is lower, you
aren't making a profit. In November, price was 44 against a cost of 45. To cover the deficit, finance will withdraw 3 trillion rubles from the wealth fund. 700 billion more goes to investments. Only 400 billion rubles remain, covering only 3 to 4 days of budget spending.
Based on the comprehensive and detailed reporting provided by Reuters, which is widely recognized as one of the most prominent and influential international news organizations currently operating across the globe today, providing timely updates and verified information from a vast network of professional journalists and correspondents who are stationed in nearly every major country and territory around the world to ensure the highest standards of journalistic integrity and accuracy in their global news coverage.
The Bank of Russia had already meticulously drafted a comprehensive formal report for the government back in February of last year, in which it provided a very clear and explicit warning to officials about the potential for a significant and problematic recurrence of these events.
Of a sustained and devastating downward spiral in global oil prices, bearing a striking resemblance to the events that unfolded during the 1980s, and ultimately emerged as one of the primary contributing factors in the eventual collapse of the former Soviet Union's economic infrastructure. And as history has shown, the Soviet Union collapsed precisely because of this fact. Essentially call into question.
The Soviet future. As history shows, it collapsed for this reason. Now Russia is in the same spot. Oil and gas provide a third of budget revenue, a third of all investment, and 2/3 of foreign currency earnings. High oil prices once let the Kremlin soften economic downturns. But now, for Russia, oil has become a vulnerability.
Russia is in a situation where American technologies, which were available until 2022, have been almost completely exhausted, and accordingly, global oil prices are falling. As a result, it's not possible to make money. Since it's not possible to make money, production has to be scaled back because it won't pay off. And any businessman, first and foremost, thinks about at least covering their costs. And if that's not completely possible at all, then that right there is your definitive answer as to why.
Oil production in Russia is declining. Traditional ways of making money are shrinking, while expenses...
But expenses aren't going anywhere. There is underfunding of the federal subjects. Yes, Moscow gets money, and so does St. Petersburg. But other federal subjects, not so much. And this creates the preconditions for, let's say, separatist sentiments among local elites. Russia doesn't care. Putin's.
Regime is getting weaker every day. It is depleting its resources. Budget gaps spur regional plans as Putin weakens. That's all for now. For more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.